All right.
How you feel, dude?
Episode 1, Falling Off the Floor podcast. This has been something that I've been working on in my brain and also over the past maybe 4 years, just like, I'm going to start my podcast. And so many friends and family being like, yeah, you need to start your podcast. Like, you need an outlet for this stuff. And this is it. This is my outlet for all of my crazy stories, the wild adventures that I get to take. This is truly going to be a place that I'm unapologetically myself, which I think if you talk to like most people would say that I'm pretty unapologetically myself. I can be pretty out there. So this is an exciting time. Episode 1, I want to just kind of lay, for lack of a better term, the ground rules of the podcast, what we're talking about, what we're going to be doing. And I wanted to introduce my producer, Naveed Nur.
Hello.
Naveed came into my life actually at an interesting time. I was getting out of a long-term relationship, and I felt like I didn't have like a lot of new friends in this new city that I moved to. And I met Naveed in a funny way, actually.
It's pretty funny, like, in how we like approach people, and we love like just like seeing people's reaction when we say this. Like, we always like say the term that you came up with.
Yeah.
We say Tinder for tennis.
Yeah, Tinder for tennis, exactly. There was an app here in Denver where you could connect with people to play tennis, and I'm a big tennis player. So is Naveed, and I like to jokingly say I swiped right on Naveed, and we met up for a match. He and I didn't really, I actually kicked his ass the first time we played. Naveed hadn't been playing tennis that long. Now he kicks my ass because he plays a lot more than I do. But we ended up playing about a year or so after the first time that we met. Started talking about skiing and snowboarding, and sure enough, beginning of last winter, we really started hanging out, and I learned more about Naveed. Naveed was a photographer for National Geographic and traveled the world, and I was like immediately like, wow, this is a guy I needed in my corner. Being someone that loves photography and travel and seeing the world, I thought it was interesting. So, Naveed, if you want to give a little intro, where you're from, how you ended up on my couch for this podcast, I'm sure the listeners would love to hear.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Bangladesh. I lived there pretty much like majority of my teenage years there, and from there my family moved around a little bit, and then we settled in Michigan because we have a bunch of my mom's side of the family living there, and I went to my end of my high school, college there, went to Michigan State, and after that I kind of didn't have a life direction. I just didn't know what I was going to do, so I started backpacking a lot and ended up meeting some photographers for Nat Geo, which kind of helped me to get in love with photography, in love with nature, doing going out and about, doing a lot of awesome things. So I met a lot of awesome, amazing people, and once I was kind of figuring out my next move to find out a city I was going to live in, I already have a few friends in Denver, so I settled for Denver, and ever since, that was 5 years ago, and haven't looked back.
Amazing. And tell me a little bit more about, you're super into astrophotography. You've taught me a lot about it. I'm not as hardcore as Naveed is when it comes to photography. We'll be like out camping, and Naveed will be like, well, the moon angle and the Milky Way will be at highest contrast at about 2:13 a.m. And I'm thinking to myself, we just hiked 14 miles. we've been on the trail, and now we're sleeping in the freezing cold, and you want to get up at 2:13 a.m. Believe me, I think what you're doing is really cool, but
Thank you.
It's beyond my level. So, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into astrophotography?
Yeah, absolutely. So I I just never thought myself I was gonna be an astrophotographer, but always had a fascination for stars and just like stargazing in general. And one a few of my friends traveling with Nat Geo, I saw them doing a lot of northern light photography, and that kind of got me into the love for doing anything and everything at night sky. So just figured out by tinkering with camera setup and just so honestly looking up a lot of YouTube tutorials and things like that. That's where
YouTube
a lot of
University, we
exactly
love it.
University of YouTube, and yeah, I learned a lot, and just over the years, decided to travel to coolest places this planet, and just do a lot of cool astrophotography, because nothing just seeing the most contrasty, beautiful thousands and millions of stars in the sky. And yeah, so it's just always fun to share it with friends too. That's why I bother you.
Yeah.
Just try to be all right, 2 a.m. be ready.
Yeah.
But
What's really great is that I can still sleep, and then you come back the next morning and show us the pictures.
That's right.
And I'm like, okay, that's really cool. I also feel very rejuvenated and refreshed.
That's right.
For the next day of hiking.
Yeah, it consists of the next day consists of a lot of caffeine for me usually, to be base level up. So
yeah, I think it's really cool. I love seeing your prints. Naveed is he's got the travel bug just like me. Naveed has been. How many countries have you been to?
I think 40 plus.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's funny. My dad recently he shared this Google document thing where everyone in the family, he listed every country on the planet, and everyone can put an X if they've been to that country. and my brother-in-law Eddie, it's wild the amount of countries he's been to, but we counted mine up, and I've been to just about 30 countries, which is pretty incredible. That you and I both have been able to see so much of this world, and be able to see the culture and everything that is involved in travel. And I was recently talking with a friend of mine that lives in Italy, and they've never been to the U.S., and we were chatting about how the U.S., it is a beautiful country.
Oh, absolutely.
It's so massive and so diverse that you get everything from the Great Plains to deserts to mountains to ocean, and the amount of activities that you can do in this country, it's pretty wild. So I feel like we're pretty lucky to call this home.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially being in the Rockies, there's so much diversity. Like you said, we get amazing weather here in the plains throughout the winter, and we get to go snowboard and ski in waist deep powder, and that is something that I don't think not many places throughout the world can say. And
in a relatively short drive.
Exactly.
Something that's great about Naveed and I, we actually do work as as wild as that sounds, and maybe what you see of us doing on social media. We do actually work, but we refuse to ski on weekends. So when you hear oh man, skiing in Colorado is such a nightmare, you're hearing that from weekend warriors. Naveed and I strategically only ski days between Monday and Friday, and then if it's on weekends, we're touring. So it's interesting. So, I wanted to give Naveed the opportunity to kind of talk about him and his background. We've got some really awesome guests lined up. I don't want to give any spoilers yet. Skiers, I'll just tell you can get excited. We've got some pretty amazing athletes, Olympians, X Games gold medalists.
Okay, without giving this away, but he shared on our group chat, when he was talking with this person, who was coming individual, and we all just lost it. We're like, this is just crazy. Like, this is beyond, like, wow, it's gonna be a treat for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of you guys know some of the background of my story. It's funny, I've recently connected with some old friends from my hometown, and they've reached out and been like, it's so great seeing what you're doing and all that you're accomplishing. And it's weird because there is a big gap between who I am now and where I was when I broke my back in 2016. Like 2016 to really like 2 years ago has been a pretty wild ride. I have been up, down, everywhere, and to give the listeners a quick little background of my story. So I grew up in a really small mountain town in Lake Arrowhead, California. Lake Arrowhead is about an hour and a half from LA. To put it in perspective, it's kind of northeast of LA, up in the San Bernardino National Forest. So I grew up in this small mountain community. We had ski resorts in Big Bear, just 30 minutes away, Bear Mountain, Snow Summit. I grew up competing on the Snow Summit race team, and then I got into a lot of freestyle stuff. Bear Mountain in between like 2005 and 2015 was legendary. It's still great. As you know, a lot of things have changed since Altera coming in, buying the resort, but it is still a legendary park. So without question, racing got quote-unquote boring, and I got into park riding, which also came with a ton of injuries. I, to this day, nothing quite compares to sliding on a rail. I mean, maybe some of the lines we had in Utah last season for the legendary 1,000-inch season,
Gosh, yeah.
that can compare.
Probably.
But yeah, everything started in this small little town. I was born in Long Beach, California, and before first grade, we moved up to Lake Arrowhead. My dad had like a second home up on the mountain for many years, and that little second home he got rid of, and my parents decided to build a house on Lake Arrowhead, and that was my whole childhood. So playing on the lake, swimming, wakeboarding, water skiing, snow skiing, anything you can think of, like fun mountain related, we had at our fingertips in Lake Arrowhead, which was cool. But, it was also growing up in a super small town. Everyone knows everything about everyone. And, that comes with its downfalls as well. I graduated high school in 2015, and I was pretty dead set on going somewhere that good skiing was involved. Sierra Nevada College in Tahoe was a top choice, University of Utah, and then CU Boulder. And CU Boulder is where I ended up. Went there my freshman year of college, and I let it all loose. So to rewind a little bit, a big part of this podcast is talking about recovery, mental health, my skiing career, skiing in general, Naveed and I's travel, and substance use was a big part of my life, which it wasn't really a problem when I was going to school in Boulder, but my accident happened freshman year. I went out for spring break. I was staying with a good buddy of mine, John Michael Fabrizi, that I grew up with, racing in Big Bear. We were on the Snow Summit race team for years together. We're having an awesome week, and we were having a couple of beers up on the mountain, and we had taken the chairlift over from Park City to Canyons, and we're just riding the park. We were at the top having some beers. They stopped spinning the lifts, and we were doing literally we probably said it. We probably said last run instead of 2-1, and that's, let's be honest. Me saying last run is probably why the accident happened.
Oh, yeah. It had to.
But
None of the other factor came in. That was the only one.
none of the drinking that I
No.
was doing or drug use. That wouldn't. It was all because I said last run. Anyways, we're rolling into the jump, and I don't remember a lot from that day. Obviously, once I get to the hospital, they're pumping me with tons of drugs, morphine, all these things to mitigate the pain. So everything from like the hospital on is especially blurry, but it was funny. I was actually talking about this with my therapist the other day. We're doing like some trauma background and stuff like that, and we were talking about the accident, and I specifically remember this moment. John Michael and I were like side by side. John Michael was doing a backflip next to me doing a front flip, and we had probably done this like several times throughout the day. It was just an awesome day in the park. I was literally flying back to Utah like the next day, and we're rolling into the jump, and I remember looking over and thinking to myself, I think we're going a little too fast. But it was super slushy. This is like spring break. We're getting towards the end of the ski season. Snow is pretty slow and slushy, so my assumption is like it's fine. Like even if we go too big, it's like slushy, whatever. But we were cooking into this thing, and if you guys see the video, it's on my Instagram. It gets like circulated around oddly at random times, but yeah, we were going a little too fast. And John Michael went huge. I went huge. And I basically did like 1 1/4 front flip on a pretty big jump. My tips caught. And that's where I like roll over. My neck gets like very crunched in. And that moment changed my life like forever.
Have you ever hit that jump before?
Oh yeah, we were like hitting it all day. It was like a total freak accident. We were just going a little too hot. You know, like I said, I don't have a lot of memory from that day, but I kind of come to on the ground, and I feel like I was like really out of breath. That was the main thing that I was feeling in the moment. I was like, oh my God, like I really can't take a breath right now. And I remember saying to John Michael, and we were with my other buddy, Jordan Ramiro, and Jordan's also a guy I grew up racing with in Big Bear, so it was kind of this like fun reunion trip. I hadn't seen these guys in a few years, and I remember like looking at John Michael and Jordan, like I knew something was wrong, but I told them to get me up. Like it felt like I couldn't get a breath, and I remember like getting kind of pulled up, and I grabbed onto John Michael's jacket, kind of around like the shirt collar, and I remember my vision just going from, let's say, a full tunnel to like a microscopic tunnel that I was so close to passing out. And that's when I was like, oh man, I'm getting a little nauseous. Guys, please wear helmets. Like seriously, it's not cool to not wear a helmet. I don't get it. I thought I was cool not wearing a helmet. I've now had several concussions, and it causes a lot of issues in my life. I wasn't wearing a helmet the day of the accident, and it probably could have, obviously there's no way to know, but it probably could have saved a lot of heartache and concussion and not remembering the day. But I remember, I'm hanging there from his jacket, and I know something's wrong at this point. I thought, okay, maybe I broke a few ribs. The last thing that I'm thinking is that I broke my spine.
Yeah.
Like that's, obviously
and you have had injuries that you've broken like bones.
Oh
like,
yeah.
right?
I've broken so many bones, and like when you break your spine, like that is the last thing that you think would happen. Like first you think, okay, I knocked the wind out of myself. Then it's like, okay, maybe this isn't knocking the wind out of myself. Maybe I cracked a few ribs. And then it really, I remember like a little bit of panic going on in terms of like, I remember John Michael and Jordan probably knew before I did that something was pretty seriously wrong. And in my head, I was like, this, it's whatever. Cracked a couple ribs. Snowmobiles roll up with ski patrol, and they start taking it like really seriously. They're putting the neck brace on, and they had a pretty good inkling that it was a spinal injury. That this is what they do for a living, and they're doing all these tests. And I remember feeling like incredibly nauseous. That's like the main thing that I remember. That I couldn't get a breath. I was feeling really nauseous, but I think like the adrenaline was really kicked in, so I wasn't having that like insane amount of pain. It was just like shock. My body is obviously not used to my spine having multiple burst fractures, and so they strap me into this toboggan that's connected to the back of a snowmobile. They like zip this thing up. It's got like kind of a tarp with a zipper, and they zip it up. And my next memory is they are driving me in the snowmobile from the canyon side to the front of like Park City. And that's a pretty long way, like to get all the way around to the front.
Yeah.
And the snowmobile, obviously they couldn't do the tarp all the way, like I wasn't in a body bag. They have to leave some air vent. And the snowmobile is kicking up like an insane amount of snow, and it is landing directly on my face. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm going to die. Like, this is the worst day of my life. I want to throw up. I definitely broke a lot of bones, and these people are like freaking out. And there is dirty, like, snowmobile snow getting tossed in my face, and I had enough at this point. So they finally get me down, and I'm thinking, like, they'll take me to the ski patrol office. Everything's good. I've never seen anything like it. There was ambulance, like, backed into the snow, and they literally, I went from snowmobile directly into the ambulance, and there was zero hesitation. It was not like, okay, we're gonna check and make sure. It was like, boom, we were off. And
do you know what kind of checks they performed on you to, like, for them to start panicking like that?
And I'm probably over exaggerating it. Like they're experts.
Yeah.
They weren't, I don't think at any point like really panicking. They deal with this on a daily basis. It was more, I could tell like on the look of their faces, and like, they're talking to the other ski patrollers, and I see my friends are, definitely a little bit worried. And I remember at some point thinking, okay, this is pretty bad. And like I said, like the memories I have from that day are so sporadic. Like, I don't remember the exact tests they were doing, but they had me in like a pretty solid hold, and they're putting their fingers around, and they knew something was bad. So it wasn't like I've broken so many bones in skiing, and it's like, okay, they take you to the patrol office, they do all these things, they'll put you in a sling, they do this, then they call the ambulance.
Yeah.
This was like, I literally arrived, the ambulance lights are on, and it was a matter of like 15 seconds of them unclipping me from the snowmobile onto a stretcher into the thing. John Michael hops in the back of the ambulance, and bless his heart, John Michael is a total legend. He's been a close friend of mine for many, many years. And I also could tell, like, on his face, he's thinking to himself, like, shit, this is pretty bad.
Yeah.
And he got on the phone with my mom and folks in California, and letting them know that, I'm not getting on a flight that day back to Boulder. I'm headed to the hospital. And I also knew that things were a little more serious when they're like, yeah, so we're going to get you to the ER, and then we're getting you up to the trauma unit. And I'm like, trauma unit? Like, what the heck is going on? Like, this can't be, like, what the heck? So, John Michael chats with my parents.
Or at this point, were you like feeling any pain, or it was just still you were riding on adrenaline?
Probably riding on adrenaline. I was also like, there was a pretty heavy level of fear, but you also, like, I'm a very optimistic person. I try and find, like, even when things are going really poorly, I try and, like, find a little bit of silver lining. And I remember, like, John Michael and I were kind of joking. I'm, like, strapped into this stretcher, like, neck. I'm like, I can't even breathe at this. And by the time I got in the ambulance, I'm pretty sure they were already giving me pain medications, like, in the ambulance. I may be mistaken on that, but I'm pretty sure, like, they were administering pain meds at this point. If anything, I was getting, like, Tylenol just to take the edge off. And I remember, like, John Michael and I were, like, kind of joking. He's like, yeah, it's fine, man. Like, we're going to get you on the plane to Boulder. You know, we'll get to the hospital. You know, like I said, bless his heart. He's trying to be an awesome friend and just, like, keep me in a good mind state. And sure enough, being me, I'm staying super optimistic. Like, we're riding the rest of this season. And that surely was not going to happen. So we got to the hospital, and again, that level of fear is kind of there the whole time, because I can see it on, like, my friends' faces, but also see it on, like, kind of like the doctors, the people around me were taking it, like, pretty seriously. It wasn't like we got to the ER and they checked me in. It was kind of like, I wouldn't say like you see in the movies, but I was, like, out of the ambulance and, like, doctors are already, like, surrounding me, like, pushing me into the hospital. They're, like, checking me out. I pretty quickly go in to get an x-ray. And at that point, I didn't really know what the outcome was going to be. I really thought, because they were like, no one was really, like, telling me what was going on. I still, in the back of my mind, thought it was, like, a rib injury, and they're taking, like, scans of my, you know, kind of front on of my chest and then turn around, kind of my back. So I'm thinking, like, okay, maybe I, like, cracked my ribs, whatever. And I will never forget that doctor walking up. You know, he reads the radiology scan and he, like, walks up. John Michael was there. I think he probably had, like, my mom on speakerphone or whatever, and the doctor was, like, as cordial as a doctor can be, but essentially said, you have major burst fractures in your spine, all throughout your thoracic spine. And I remember that feeling in the moment of, like, whoa, your heart drops. You're like,
Yeah.
am I going to be paralyzed? Like, shouldn't I be paralyzed already? And
Were you like able to move your feet at this point? Or?
yeah, so
okay.
that was, like, a reassuring thing, obviously, to me and the doctor. The doctor also was, like, looking at the scan and then looking at me and thinking, like, what the, like, this is pretty wild. I remember he was, like, taking a pen and, like, poking me on, like, my toes and, like, doing some other stuff to make sure that I had, like, feeling in my toes and beep, 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 all this different stuff. And there was a level of, I think, shock coming from the doctor in a little bit of a sense. He's, like, looking at the scan. He's, you know, move your toes for me, move your legs. So I'm, like, doing all this stuff for him. I'm like, Doc, I'm fine, you know. Obviously, I broke, like, what does all this mean?
Yeah.
And he quickly explained that this is super serious, and that I would be going in to get surgery, like, almost immediately. One of the things that they had to do was obviously get all the booze out of my system. So I'd been drinking beer all day. I needed an empty stomach to go into surgery. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, man, I have only had beer to drink today. And I had not had water. And I'm like, I'm nauseous beyond any level that I can even explain, like, so nauseous. And they're like, well, we can give you ice chips and, like, a little sponge, and you can wipe your lips and, crunch on the
I'm
ice.
assuming the booze and the pain medicine is not going well together.
Yeah,
either.
it's, the concoction in the stomach. We'll get to this later in the podcast, but those concoctions I got very good at down the road. Not something I'm proud of, but anyways, I think I've got a stomach of steel now. So they give me these ice chips, and I feel like I'm in the middle of the Sahara Desert. I haven't had water in 15 years, something crazy, and I'm taking these ice chips, and I thought I was so sly. I'm taking the cups with the sponge, and I'm like sliding it under the hospital bed, like in this little shelf, and letting it melt, and then drinking it. And I keep doing this over and over again. And the nurse is like, "Where's all those chips? The ice chips. Where are they going?" I was like, God, I don't know. And so they finally get me in for an MRI. Of course, I'm getting pumped with, opiate painkillers, and I'm not supposed to have food in my stomach. And now they're putting me in a literal coffin for an hour to get this scan done. I don't know if you've had an MRI. They slide you in this thing. You got about 3 inches, and it feels like you're in a coffin.
And the sound too, just like
oh yeah,
whoop,
and they're like, they put some headphones on. I'm trying to stay calm, dude. I lasted 5 minutes in that damn machine and projectile vomit all over the inside of the MRI machine. And I remember the look on that radiology's face. He's like, dude, it was so difficult to get you in this quickly. They had a pretty big backlog of people that needed MRIs. And you're going to do me like this? And you're going to make me clean up all this? Listen, man, I'm down bad, all right? And it didn't end there. So they clean it all up. They're like, we have other people that need to take these MRIs. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, whatever. We'll figure it out. They put me back in that thing probably 6 hours later. Same thing. Couldn't make it through. I was just getting so claustrophobic and nauseous in the MRI machine. Blech, throw up again. Now they can't get the MRI done until the next day. And I'm thinking to myself, how do I mess this up so many times? Third time's the charm. They get me in that bed, Larry. And let me tell you, I got through that damn MRI. Over an hour or whatever it was, I got through it. I was probably playing Mozart. I'm a big Frank Sinatra guy, maybe a little Moonlight Sonata from Beethoven. Was that Beethoven or Mozart? Mozart was Moonlight Sonata. Anyways, if I got that wrong, don't chastise me. So I get in for the third scan, and radiologist comes back. They confirm everything. I got burst fractures T2 to T6 in my thoracic spine. I've got various cracks all over my thoracic spine, but the big issue was T2 to T6 were what they call burst fractures. So it's essentially when your spine works kind of like an accordion, and as you push it more and more together, it finally, the only direction it can go is to burst. So there was all these bone fragments, and the doctor was like, we are going to get you in immediately. So my parents flew out at this point from California, and my dad's probably thinking to himself oh God. So I grew up, my nickname was Mr. Deductible. My parents would always wait until after ski season. My dad needed a knee replacement one year, and he goes, well, Doc, he's telling the orthopedic he was working with, let's wait until April. Austin's for sure going to break something January to April. We'll meet the deductible, and then I'll get the knee replacement. How does that sound? And my dad is probably thinking to himself, what the hell? He's obviously worried out of his mind flying because he just hears that his son has exploded his spine. And so they fly out, and they told my parents they didn't make it before the surgery. And I remember, so it was a pretty long surgery. I was under for a lot of hours. I think the surgery lasted like somewhere between like 6 and 8 hours. I was like out. They're, putting in all these pins. For the people watching on video, gruesome, but I'll show you some x-rays here on the screen. So I get pins. They got these rods that come down, basically holds the whole thoracic spine in place. And I woke up to my parents being in Utah, and I remember that's when I think it like really set in that this was way more serious than my like 18-year-old optimistic mind of I've broken every bone in my body. Like, this will just be another 3 to 6 months. I'll be fine. That's like when I finally saw my parents, it was this like overwhelming feeling of like emotions of, oh man, this is bad.
Yeah.
And what's crazy about the spine is like, they take out all these bone fragments, they put in the hardware, and the doctor told me, he was like, you need to like literally get run over by a train for you to like re-break this portion of your spine. Like, you are locked in. This is titanium. Wow. You're good. It's crazy. My dad broke his back as well playing football in high school or college. Must have been high school. He played college basketball. Armstrong State, D2, Bradley Becker, total legend. So my dad broke his back, and back then they weren't doing like titanium surgeries. He got a bone graft, spinal fusion. Wow. So they essentially like wrapped the spine in bone graft, and it is really easy. And you hear these stories all the time. So then they moved from bone graft to some different metal before they started doing titanium. And the way that the doctor was explaining it to me is that with bone grafts and with, I don't know, maybe it was stainless steel before they started using titanium, but it's kind of like a paper clip. Like, you bend it enough, it finally snaps.
Gotcha.
And I've talked to other people that have had spinal fusions, and 30, 40 years after they're getting it, all of a sudden they reach over to tie their shoe and
wow.
And this obviously horrible feeling.
Yeah.
And you have to get the spinal fusion redone. They cut you back open. They put everything back in. And it, to kind of get back to the point of all this is, he tells me I need to get run over by a train for this to ever be broken again. And I thought that was optimistic. But they get you going like pretty quickly. So I was in the hospital so the accident was on March 20th, 2016. And I got out of the hospital either on my birthday on March 27th or the day after. It was about a week I was in the hospital, and the next day after the surgery, they literally had me up taking steps. So they like got me in a walker, and I took like 4 steps, and they're like, great, that's it for today. And then the next day you take a few more. And
were you like scared to take the steps?
No, I was like stoked to like get out of bed.
Wow.
The atrophy of just like everything, and that's when the pain like really set in. And so anyways, they had like mock cars set up in the hospital. It literally, like, they cut a car in half, and it's like in these rooms for like physical therapy. They like taught me how to get into a car and how to get out of bed and do these, like, it's called like a fireman's roll. And so I used to have to like lay in bed, and I would literally have to call my mom and be like, hey, I need to get out of bed, I need to go to the bathroom, whatever. So I'd like roll over onto my side. My mom would move my legs so it keeps your spine in like a straight position the whole time. She'd move my legs out, and then I would lean up, put my feet on the ground, grab the walker. And yeah, I had to lose like all sense of humility. I couldn't shower alone. Yeah, it was intense. It was a really long recovery, and I would not wish it on my literal worst enemy. And this is also the first time that I was introduced to opiates, OxyContin. And, I was just talking with my therapist about this the other day. when I was sitting in the hospital, they had this like machine. It was kind of like an IV sort of thing, and there's a cord running to my arm, and it's got a timer on it, and I've got a button, and it would like count down, and I don't know what it was like every 15 or 30 minutes the amount of time was.
Yep.
I could press this button and it would release some amount of, I think it was morphine or whatever, and that was literally my life for like a week straight.
No.
I'm like laying in this bed,
Mm-hmm.
and the crazy thing is I was so nauseous from the concussion and so blurry-eyed. When I tried to look at my phone,
Yeah.
it was, my phone's blurry, the light hurt, so I'm literally just sitting in this dark room for like days on end, and the only thing I was doing was thinking to myself, wow, these drugs are pretty awesome. And, you know, as I'm getting ready to leave is when the OxyContin prescription comes, and that's my introduction to OxyContin. We'll go very in depth over many episodes about my wild drug stories and how I ended up where I did, but yeah, OxyContin was a devil in hiding. And it's a weird thing because, you know,
it's as advertised like you know,
yeah,
like it's like the angel drug almost.
Exactly, and all these shows that are coming out on various streaming platforms about it, guys, if you haven't seen them, please go check them out. I don't know if I can say the name, copyright laws. I think I can. Yeah. The name of the show on Netflix is Painkillers. The other one on Hulu is Dope Sick.
I have not seen that yet. Painkillers, like, it opened my eyes. Like, I knew, like, some, like, you know, about, like, the opioid crisis here, but it's just on a next level, the manipulation and, like, just, you know, in public eye, they're trying to, like wash all this perception of, like, you know, how bad these things are.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's crazy.
Yeah. It's, it was even eye-opening to me, and I was part of the drug culture and OxyContin and street drugs and heroin and everything. I was a part of all that, and you still don't even really know the backstory. And by the way, the Sackler family is actually in the Supreme Court as we speak. At the time of recording this, they went into the Supreme Court today facing some major litigation against them, which will effectively... So Purdue Pharma filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Thank God. Purdue Pharma, for those of you that don't know, were the producers and inventors of OxyContin, which came in many different forms, from 10 milligram all the way up to the, as drug addicts very well know, the OC80s, which is just insane to me. And it was run by one sick, cunning family, the Sacklers, and it was run by Richard Sackler. Sorry, I was blanking on his name. Richard Sackler was kind of the brains behind all of it. But anyways, it's a show that I think everyone should watch. Doesn't even matter if you know anything about the crisis. The crazy thing about this opioid crisis is that I don't think you can talk to really anyone in the United States today to some capacity that doesn't know someone that's been involved in the opiate crisis, whether it's a friend that was addicted to drugs, whether it was a friend of a friend, somebody that went to your high school passed away of an overdose. There is, in some way, I feel like almost everyone in this country, and even worldwide at this point, is some way connected to this crisis. Someone knows of a friend or whatever that has struggled, and that's another big reason that I'm doing this podcast, is to, in some level, inspire hope into individuals that comeback's possible. I am in my comeback era right now. It has been a really wild ride, and I'm super stoked to be doing everything that I'm doing, and to get back to the talk about OxyContin in my story is that is where it started. It started in the hospital. I then get home. I'm being given these pill bottles that are 6 inches tall, just filled to the brim with OxyContin. Take it every 3 hours, every 2 hours, and there's this whole schedule. And I remember at some point thinking to myself, these things are badass. I don't know what they are, but...
Have you ever done anything like similar before?
Not really like opiates.
Yeah.
In high school, I did what any high schooler does and dabbled in, smoking weed and drinking with friends and, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I was not in high school doing OxyContin or any of these drugs. So this was like a new feeling to me. Even in college, like I got to college and we're doing fun party drugs, and I'm, I always knew that addiction like very much runs in my family.
Yeah.
I always knew that I had an addictive personality, but this is like what really skyrocketed everything. And getting home and after like living what I thought, a bit of a college life and being away from my parents, to sitting in my room at home, which like a company came in and there was like a hospital bed and this IV thing, and it's like they literally like pushed my bed out of the room, and it was like it literally looked like a little mini like hospital setup.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have to call my parents to go to the bathroom, and the only thing that was bringing me solace were these damn pills. And it somebody that's was very close to me and unfortunately passed away, Austin Eubanks. Austin Eubanks was he was the director of this rehab that I went to in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and he was such an amazing guy to my parents, to people in my family. Really incredible guy. He actually has a TED Talk, guys. He was in the Mile High TED Talk series where he talks about how the opiate epidemic had now turned into a pandemic. Austin was shot in Columbine.
Wow.
So he was shot multiple times during the Columbine horrible shooting that happened here in Colorado many years ago. He watched some of his best friends killed directly in front of him. And something he talks about in that TED Talk is how he was healing the emotional, initially the doctors gave him OxyContin he was shot. Like, this guy's got broken bones, he's been shot. They're healing the physical pain. But then the physical pain eventually goes away. But you still have these pills. And as you're taking them, it's healing the emotional pain in the moment. And you have no idea how incredibly dependent your body is. Chemically, emotionally, everything becomes dependent on this one thing. And the way that I try and explain addiction to people that have no idea what addiction is like we're sitting here right now. Mm-hmm. We're like starting to get to dinner time. Yeah. I'm getting pretty hungry. Like my stomach's, something tells me I need to eat food. It's this natural body reaction. Oh, I'm thirsty. I'm going to have a sip of water. Mm-hmm. When you train your brain to become completely dependent on a substance, your brain begins, and people can drink and do drugs and then wake up the next morning and never think about them again because they don't have that addictive gene. And, there's been years of science to show that it's a hereditary disease. Brain scans and everything show that it's an actual disease. And, the feeling that you get is like waking up in the morning and you need to go to the bathroom or you need to drink water. It becomes part of your routine and who you are. Like, you need to drink water to survive.
Yeah.
And now I've trained my brain that in order to get up in the morning and feel like a normal human being, I need to take this damn pill to make everything better in the moment. Guys, if you guys hear crazy dogs barking, it's this horrific neighbor of mine. Their dog barks at the same time every single day. It is incredibly annoying. Anyways, back on topic. It becomes it takes over every part of your life.
Yeah.
You run out of money,
Mhm.
one, so then you see people doing bad things to get money, because when you run out of food and water, your survival instinct kicks in. You will do anything for food and water,
Yeah.
because human beings are born to survive.
Correct.
I retrained my brain that I needed this pill in order to survive. That is like, and that's the best way that I can explain it to someone that doesn't understand like addiction,
Yeah.
is that it literally becomes who you are. It, in every sense of the word, and you become 100% dependent on it.
Like you
It's-
feel like you need this to like just be
Function.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the funny thing is that for me, especially like when I was really getting after it with drugs and alcohol, the instinct to drink water and eat food actually goes out the door as well. And alcohol and drugs, that actually becomes the main thing. There's this weird stigma around addicts, and who knows if it will ever completely change. When you say the word alcoholic or addict, you think of the guy that's sitting under the bridge, panhandling for money, when actually it's like your teachers, your lawyers, your doctors, your presidents. We've had tons of presidents of the United States that have struggled with alcoholism. Addiction does not discriminate. And the unfortunate thing is that those people that are actually sitting under bridges and genuinely struggling to have food on the table or even have a roof over their head, that has so much more to do with mental health. And with someone that still to this day struggles with mental health myself, and my only answer to the voices in my head and everything that was going crazy at that time was that these drugs quieted everything down for a second. And for someone that's living on the streets, now they're at a point that they can't get a job because their mental health has declined so much. The only time that they feel relatively normal is when they take the drugs. And I hear comments from people all the time, like about homeless people that are like, oh, they made the decision to be there. And it's like, do you think like anyone actually wants to be living on the streets?
No.
Do you think anyone actually wants to be addicted to drugs? Like, if I were to drink or do drugs right now with how many years I've been sober, that's a choice. What wasn't a choice was being prescribed something with very little knowledge of the background of it, to then taking it really as prescribed, and then you reach this point where they're like, okay, like your pain should be gone, we're taking these pills away, and now I'm incredibly sick. I didn't even know what the word withdrawal meant, and I am sweating. I've got ants crawling under my skin. I'm going crazy, and the only thing that made it feel better in that moment was a pull of vodka right from the bottle. And fast forward a little bit, that's where my love for alcohol came in, was when the opiates ran out. Alcohol was like this middle ground. I was like a relatively normal kid. I didn't know that heroin was the street equivalent of the pill that I was taking. I didn't know the first person to ask where to get Oxycontin. I was just like, okay, the doctor said stop taking them, so I did. But now I'm super sick, and I don't know what to do. I'm incredibly nauseous and anxious, and alcohol was a nice little to keep things going. So I know we're coming up on an hour here, and initially this podcast we're going to keep it at 30 minutes.
30 minutes, we tried, but
we tried.
I mean, it's introduction, right? Like you're laying the groundwork here.
Yeah.
And kind of like, letting the audience know which direction and what type of things we would like to talk about here.
Yeah.
We'd also probably include a lot of our adventures, and also I feel like knowing Austin for like almost for 2 years, like the stories that he comes out with, and like we're like, we need to document this. This is like the platform for this. We've been begging for this for so long. So this is incredibly exciting.
Yeah. like I said, I'm going to be unapologetically myself. For those of you that don't jive with that, then don't listen. But I've got some really crazy stories of my past that Naveed and some of my closer friends have heard over the years, and I'm gonna let them loose. You know, I crashed a car into a church in Boulder, Colorado, like a week before, and the crazy thing, it wasn't even my car. Alex, I'm sorry. I've said sorry before. My roommate Alex, I took her car that morning to go pick up drugs, and then I crashed into a church, and that priest basically said, "You need Jesus," as like blood is coming down my face, and the front of the car is jammed into this front steps of the church, and I'm not even driving my car. Anyways, we'll talk about that more in another episode. That is not even close to the amount of craziness I've been involved in. But that's the point of this thing. Some episodes are going to have nothing to do with recovery and mental health, and other episodes will. Like I said, we've got some really exciting guests lined up from the ski industry, outdoor industry. We're going to talk a lot about my ski career and where I've gotten today. I got a lot of my sponsors back. I'll be riding for Majesty Skis this year, Zeal Optics again, Pret helmets, Beist gloves, Stio outerwear out of Jackson Hole, and it's literally been a dream come true. This has been a really wild ride from March 20th, 2016 until I don't even know what the date today is, early December 2023. And it's crazy. I'm literally graduating from college on Saturday of next week.
That's crazy.
Pretty wild. December 16th, I am graduating with a bachelor's degree in marketing and business analytics. Took 9 years and 17 rehabs.
So that is like what, super senior?
Yeah. Basically, yeah, like 9th senior. But it's fine. I walked in my first day of coming back to school, and I'm like 26, and I'm looking over, and there's like 17-year-old kids like walking into college for the first time, and I'm like, oh my God, is that what I looked like when I was 17? Like, oh man. But it's been a really cool experience, and we just launched our company, Mountain Born Media, and who knows? I don't know if my degree will ever come in hand, but I wanted to finish something that I started, and that's exactly what we're doing. So we're going to be doing, like we said, awesome episodes on various topics that have impacted my life, Naveed's life, travel. I would love to hear more from Naveed about growing up in Bangladesh and his travels around Southeastern Asia and Europe, and this guy's been all over the globe. He knows Iceland like the back of his hand. So we're going to have a lot of topics, a lot of really cool guests, but I wanted to just kind of lay out where things really began for me in terms of my downfall. There's some things that I'm going to be super straightforward about in my past. I had what would have seemed like growing up like the perfect childhood, and I had anything but the perfect childhood. It was weird. I grew up in this family that everything always had to look like super manicured on the outside, and what I went through as a kid, nothing. My parents might be the greatest people I've ever come in contact with. My dad and mom mean everything to me, my brothers, but some things happened to me as a kid that changed who I am as a person, and I'm going to go a little bit deeper into that as well and talk about how things have affected me as an adult, what I'm doing today in terms of skiing and our company, Mountain Born Media, and we're going to see where this thing goes. Yeah. And, we're going to be posting on socials and stuff, so if you guys have anything that you want to hear about. I've already been receiving messages from people like, oh my God, you got to tell the story about the Four Seasons in Boston. Like, tell the Four Seasons in Boston story first episode. And I'm like, no. Four Seasons in Boston, that comes down the line.
That's a hook story.
That's a hook story. That's like, you put the little hook in the beginning, and that's what we get 1 million views on Instagram for. So that'll come down the line. Boston, wow, that was a crazy period of my life. But anyways, any suggestions or things that you guys want to hear, shoot me a DM, and we will get to chatting about it. We have got some great guests here in the coming weeks, and we will chat with you soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Falling Off the Floor podcast, episode 1. Adios. But.